Hi, folks. Welcome to the Philosophy Podcast. Today, I have an awesome guest I'm excited to introduce. Now, I'm going to give you a couple fun facts before I tell you who she is, but she is the author of a book called Accountants, You're Creative. I ran across this title somewhere in the internet in my social media algorithms, and I was like, okay, you've got me intrigued. And I learned a little bit about Karen as I did a little research before today's podcast. She is a British and American dual citizen who lives out of Scotland. She's the founder of The Profitable Firm, is a creative agency serving accountants worldwide. And for over 20 years, she's helped attract clients through the love of creativity, structured approach to marketing. Jason Statz, who's very well known in the industry and probably coined as like the creative accountant, actually wrote the foreword for her book, Accountants, You're Creative. So welcome, Karen Reyburn. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Carlos.
Okay, cool. So I know we jammed a little bit before we were officially doing this podcast, and I'm also in the journey of writing a book, and that's kind of where our conversation started. What was really cool about the themes that you talk about in the book are really like the practice of experimentation, that creativity doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an artist or a painter or a musician. It's really more the act of thinking creatively. It's the act of thinking about interesting, new, alternate, or creative ways to solve problems. And I feel like in accounting, it really feels like most accountants think that they're not creative because that's why they chose to be behind a computer. That's why they chose to do spreadsheets, because creativity was something that just wasn't something that was natural to them. So could you expand a little bit on that and like why you were so passionate about wanting to plant your flag around helping accountants really unlock that piece?
Yeah, I think the main reason is having worked exclusively with accountants for over 15 years, I have seen firsthand their creativity in their business, with their clients, in their marketing, in areas that oftentimes I get ideas from. So I'll have a meeting with an accountant and they'll go, I was thinking this about our pricing and what do you think? And we go back and forth. But 9 times out of 10, the best marketing ideas come from the accountant saying, what if? How might we? I wonder. I was curious about. I noticed that. And then a lot of times they maybe get stuck and don't know what to do with their idea, but that doesn't mean that you're not a creative person. It just means that the practice of taking your idea and implementing it or considering whether it needs to be implemented or whatever, maybe you need some help with that side. But owning the creative thinking process that you for sure have, every human has it, every accountant has it, then when you own that, you go, well, okay, I am a creative person. So I am able to address this marketing question. Maybe I need some help with the strategy or need to do some more research, or is this the right audience to look at? But ultimately, most of your best marketing ideas are going to come from thinking about your clients, thinking about what they're troubled with or bothered with or having challenges with or excited or motivated about, thinking about your team and your systems and your processes and how you can do that better, thinking about your client experience, and then coming up with a way to share what you're doing. And a lot of accountants have started to go more into this with AI because they're using AI to literally play with what if, how might we. But we can go into this later, but there is also the danger that if you use AI as your replacement, like it will do the creativity you're creating, then you can be blocking some of those great ideas. But the creativity is there.
Right. And I honestly would attribute to that. Honestly, there's laziness, but like, I don't think laziness can be a good thing and a bad thing. Like, and this is my view of it. Okay. I consider myself lazy, but in a productive way, in the sense that like, I don't want to do it for a long period of time or whatever, but I will not sacrifice my creative or original thinking. Right. So I actually will activate my creative and original thinking so I could be the laziest possible person in getting this the most efficient way. If that
I
does that
love
make
it.
sense?
It
But
does.
then,
It really
but
is a
then,
love of
yeah,
efficiency and hating to do the same thing the same way. And you're like, this is not the best use of my creative time.
Yeah. So I think lazy, if used right, could be a form of creativity.
I like it.
But I think lazy, if used wrong, is more like, I think it could be like there's some sort of self-sabotage that says, let me turn this into a task with
Yes.
no meaning or purpose. Like, so creativity can't be a task. So I think that's what would be like lazy, right? Like, when you say write this email for me, and you input zero human like intention or what you want out of it, or prompting or context, that laziest form, I do believe it, because we're just trying to make that just efficient for the sake of being efficient.
Yeah,
So
which is exactly why it's marketing that ultimately doesn't work. And we've already seen that with accountants who are like, oh, I'll get AI to write my emails and write my social posts. And then they realize nobody likes those social posts. Nobody's engaging with them. Nobody's responding to these emails because they're boring. Nobody's engaging with your brilliant new idea that you churned out in 3 minutes because it wasn't tested with actual humans. And a lot of times we do use AI to avoid the hard work of creativity. Creativity is hard work. And if you tell yourself any different, if you're saying, oh, creativity is the fun part, sure, there's a fun element to it, but you've got to set rhythms and you've got to work at it. And if we just go, oh, I don't need to write a book, I can just have AI write it for me, you didn't learn anything from the process. You didn't wrestle. It's the equivalent of like, oh, I don't need to go to the gym to be healthier. I can just, whatever this quick fix thing is. That's why people navigate to that. And you don't learn anything about yourself. You don't
yes,
wrestle through the tough part and get to a much more lasting quality outcome. So it's the same thing with creativity and marketing. You're going to need to wrestle a bit. You're going to need to experiment. And I've got a whole chapter on failure
yeah.
because that's part of the deal. We don't love failure. We don't seek failure. But if you think you're going to find the perfect marketing thing and do it and get results, then you are going to be disappointed because you're going to have to wrestle with it a bit and figure out what works for you and for your clients.
Yeah, and this is where I connect tremendously with your content, because it's in so much alignment with the research that I've done. And my book is titled Failblazers, which is basically, you use failure as the fuel. Okay, you
Yeah,
use failure as the fuel
love
for
it.
growth, not as the thing that shapes your identity. And I've toiled a lot with the fear of failure throughout my entire journey, as in a career, my personal life, and that I actually used that as like my fuel to write this, because it's like, wait, I got a ton of experience in failing. But here I am. Okay, I survived. I'm doing well. I feel great about myself. Like, I'm solid. I know exactly who I am, and I accept exactly as I am, and I accept all the failures that come to me as learning opportunities. And when I realized that that shift was so powerful, it made almost anything and everything like it's not scary. And one of the things that I mentioned, which is in alignment with what you share in the book, is I think that there are five, we'll call them characters, or five like avoidance strategies for
Right.
us to excuse not taking action, which is overthinking, perfectionism, procrastination. I also think people who are high achievers are actually afraid of failure, and I could unpack that. But then, and then the imposter, right? Like, and then these like five things are just excuses for us not to take action. And as it comes to creativity, it's, to your point, I think some people find an easy cop out to say, since I'm not creative, therefore I'm not going to do the creative thing. I'll delegate it, or I just won't do the thing. But I'll stay comfortable in my perfectionist
Right.
or procrastination, as so that I can make excuses not to do the thing that I really want to do.
And also, to follow on from that, missing out on the opportunity to realize that your creativity doesn't mean you have to become a graphic designer or a website builder. Like, your creativity in saying, here's what my clients really care about and what we do at our firm, you can then get a website builder or developer or designer or editor for your book or whatever it be. But I do agree that we are blocked by our fears, or imposter syndrome, a huge one. I see accountants doing that all over the place, going, well, look at that accountant, look at that accountant. We're like, you're looking at the show reel first. You don't know what
Mhm.
the reality is. And secondly, okay, maybe they are doing great, but I'm sure they also had a failure time in their life or multiple times, which is why I think, books and content on failure is so important because,
Hmm.
especially where we're going with AI, people value honesty and reality so much more now that when you go, hey, I failed, let me tell you about where and how I failed, they're like, oh my gosh, finally somebody who gets it. And you're not listening to the person going, well, I wake up at 4 a.m. every morning and take an ice bath, and then I write 3 books, and then I do, and you're like, is that, it's not even real. Of course it's not real. So
Hmm.
it can over discourage you. But if you simplify it down to what areas do I want to apply my inherent creativity to, then you can outsource some of the things that aren't your area.
Such a great point. And like to your the big thing you're talking about, reality and authenticity, and I think the bigger word too is vulnerability. That's what's
Yeah.
going to attract connection. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm human too. I'm someone who messes up as well, and and I sucked, and that creates a little bit of empathy and a little bit of feeling like, oh, well, that person did make the mistake, but it required courage to do that. Maybe I should practice courage a little bit, and but sometimes what tends to happen inside our own brains, especially when we feel triggered or we feel fear of rejection, feel failure, it's overwhelming feeling. And so,
Yes.
like, how do you come down from the overwhelming feeling and not let the story tell you that that's the reality? Like, how do you reframe it? How do you challenge those thoughts? And so I love that you have a lot of creative exercises throughout the book of small things that people can do. So it just activates for them to do non-scary, creative things that just helps reinforce and stack confidence on, I am creative, like,
Yes.
and being able to just like lean on that. It could be all right. And then I love that you have this concept called how might we, which
Yes.
is to open up more thinking without feeling the judgment or the pressure or this sense of like doom. Anything
Yeah.
that you can expand on that idea?
Yeah, I was literally just thinking today and reading a little bit about the concept of brainstorming and in that early stage process. And one of the books I'm reading right now is Unreasonable Hospitality. Not sure if you've read that one.
Not yet,
Some
but I heard the title and it's on my to read
It's been
list.
on my list for ages, but one I'm reading a portion of it every day at lunch, and I'm finding that's a nice creative rhythm for me because otherwise I won't finish the book. And this way, it's the kind of book you read a page and go, I need to mull that over. I need to think
Hmm.
about it.
Hmm.
So one of the things that he said was brainstorming, we often cut off the process with solutions too fast, which is so absolutely true. So we're going, okay, how might we change our services in a way that's more appealing to the prospects? And we're like, well, we could do this. And then we go, oh no, that wouldn't work because. And he said what the example he gave was someone that he called in to help him with a presentation of a dessert at a restaurant. And the person he called in is a magician. And they were like, let's turn it into a magic trick. And we do this and this and this. And he goes, cool. How would we do that? And the guy goes, I have no idea, but we're going to figure it out. And he,
Nice.
he said that concept of accepting that we have no idea how we're going to figure this out, but we are not allowing ourselves to be stopped before we even start. And I've seen this 1,000 times with my clients who are accountants. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in my team. And I have to work on that for all of us and be like, hey, I notice we're moving to solutions. Let's not do that. This is not the solutions meeting. This is the bit where we throw out the really stupid ideas because you often, I mean, connected to you fail and you learn, stupid ideas actually lead you to great ideas.
Uh-huh.
But you gotta let them run. I forget if I put this in the book, but it's the story of the company who was wrapping something fragile, china plates, in like either newspaper or some kind of thing, and they couldn't find a way to have the best kind of wrapping that protected the plates but also wasn't too expensive and all this. So they were brainstorming, what do we wrap the plates in? Do we wrap them in newspaper? Do we wrap them in paper? Do we wrap them in bubble wrap? What do we use? And they had a meeting to say, what are, like, there's no bad idea, like literally the stupidest worst ideas. And the problem with newspaper was that no matter how much they told people not to read it, your brain subconsciously reads the paper while you're folding. So someone said, well, why don't we just poke out the eyes of the people who are folding? Solves that problem. They won't read the newspaper. And everyone's like, obviously, that's a horrible idea. Don't even suggest it. But then they went, well, what if we hire people who are blind and they do the folding because they won't be subconsciously reading it? They will just be using the paper. And it worked brilliantly. So,
Wow.
like, what a horrible idea. And somebody's like, I
But it
can't.
inspired an adjacent idea that actually, yeah,
Yeah,
so cool.
an actual
Wow.
good idea, because of course we're not gonna stab people's eyes
Mhm.
out, but the principle underlying it was, how can we solve this issue of people and they had tried other things. They said, "What if we use newspapers with foreign languages?" Still didn't work. It still wasn't the speed they wanted. So I think of that when I'm thinking of brainstorming, because we think of it and go, "Well, that's stupid, and that's horrible, and I'm not gonna be the person who says that."
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
ultimately,
it's
what we're doing is just letting ourselves have ideas.
yeah, I think I just have like a new unlock in the way that you mentioned that this could be so relatable around developing any skill, right? Like it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. You know, we kind of know that famously. You look at numbers and it's like you need the reps, you know,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
the idea, like a hit song for many of these artists requires for them to make 200 bad songs, you know, and I'm a songwriter and musician.
Yeah.
They're not all winners, but
Yes.
there's one from time to time that people will be like, you know, it's catchy and they'll sing it back to me and they'll play it on Spotify or whatever, and I feel proud of that. I'm like, but it took me 200 songs to get to that
Yes.
one, you know.
Yeah.
And I think the concept of like a bad idea or a good idea is not bad or good. It's
Yeah.
just the rep of an idea.
Yes.
You know what
I
I mean?
love
Like
that.
that's the unlock. It's like
Yeah.
get the reps out of the ideas because sometimes the bad idea will inspire the good idea. And I would even argue that most really great ideas that ever came out were stemmed or inspired by bad ideas.
Always, I think, because, and I mentioned this in the book, the concept of quantity over quality while you are getting to the quality. So we're like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a real habit that accountants have, and I've raised my hand at this, I'm a CPA as well, but all of the clients I work with do have a habit of being like, what is the fastest, most efficient, best way to do it the best the first time without
Always.
the reps, without the
Sure.
fails? And I can understand that, but if we change our perspective and say, right, we're going to have to do it 100 times, 1,000 times before we improve. So I've accepted that. Then actually, our goal is not quality at the beginning. Our ultimate goal is quality. But at the beginning, we go, well, if I'm going to get better at video, I am just going to record 100 videos. And that's one of the things I suggest. I've got stories in the book about clients who have done it. And one of the clients said, actually, my biggest win in doing 100 videos for 100 days was somebody who messaged me about how I helped inspire them because they had cancer. And he was talking about how he and his wife had cancer. And it was not accounting related. It was not tax related. It didn't bring him business. But he said, if that was the only result I got, and I got loads of other results, that would have been worth it to me because I impacted this person's life. So there's
Mm-hmm.
also the bonus extra that you get from the quantity
Sure.
that you didn't plan for, maybe an emotional movement or a creative opening of new ideas, or realizing that you don't want to actually run the firm the way you're running it. I've seen clients do that. I had a client one time that was like, we went back and forth on their strategy, and finally they were like, I don't think I want to run this anymore. And I'm like, well, that's an acceptable outcome to our strategy. Let's dig into that further. And I think a lot of times we're fearful of what this might bring out, and we just want to churn stuff out and keep doing what we're doing. But we've got to come back to, are you getting what you need to get? Not just financially, but in your life. Do you have the time you need? Do you have the freedom you need? And if you do not, you're going to need to get creative in your thinking about that too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'll give you a quick joke. You know, I have the utmost pleasure of having a brainstorm partner, which is the co-founder, my brother Hector. And one of the things we've always like joked about is we want to create a podcast called the Bad Idea Brothers podcast.
Yes.
where
Do
all
it.
we do is just talk about bad ideas.
Love
But
this.
then we do this. So well from time to time I'll visit him at the house, and his wife will be kind of like hovering around and just rolling her eyes like these guys are just so annoying. All they do is just brainstorm the stupidest things in the world. And we'll grab like an 8 by 11 and I'll just draw random things in corners. There's no way, shape, or there's no
Yeah.
order. It's
Yeah.
not like list 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
It's like he'll say something, I'll put that in the top right corner. Say something, I put it
Brilliant.
in the bottom left, and then I'll draw like a surfer guy while he's talking. And it's just like all these
Amazing.
things going on. And then I will grab this and be like, so what are we doing now? And we're like, probably nothing, but this one thing we should probably
Yes.
go and figure out.
Yeah.
But it's just so it's just a practice of like having no consequences, just like this freedom of creative thinking, no judgment, staying
Yes.
curious, like
Yes.
helping yes and someone's idea, or maybe, well, what if this? And like I think about there's got to be, I think like Hector and I have this dichotomy of like he thinks of possibility and I think of probability. And then
Mm,
sometimes we switch, right? Because like he'll say, what if? And I'll be like, well, how probable? How likely?
right.
And he's like, well, don't think about that yet. Let's just think about what if. And then sometimes I'll switch and I'll be the what if, and he'll go into, well,
Yes.
how likely, how probable? Because sometimes there's logic and emotion, right? And there's got to be a checks and balances in creativity if you want to bring it to real fruition. But it's such a fun exercise.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it is another one that I've found really effective is the reward versus protection
mhm.
approach. So when you're looking at your idea, and this would be further on once you've got your brainstormed ideas, but it could also work for the brainstorm and be like, what are all the ideas that will bring us reward? It'll bring us more money, more clients, and better profit, more time. What's the reward? And then the flip side is what are all the protective things we can do? Protect our company, protect our IP, protect our clients, protect our client
Mm,
relationship. And interestingly, I remember having a conversation with someone where he and I were looking at doing a project together, and we worked out that in that particular project, I needed to be focused on the protection of me, my company, my IP, and he needed to be focused on the reward. And we went,
mm,
well, now that we know that, we'll just swap in our minds. Like you said, we'll just play the other game and be like, okay, so how do I make sure that I get the reward? And he goes, how do I make sure that I'm being protected? And that's a perfect example. I wish I had that in my book. That's a great creative exercise to get the two areas and then swap them and do the one that you're not used to, because we are all
mhm.
going to default to, maybe you'll default to the protection one or the reward one or the
Yeah, the
possibility.
conservative thing. Yeah,
Right.
typically, because in my assessment, because I'm not an accountant by nature, but like I'm like what do you call it? Like a secondhand accountant or whatever you want to call it.
I like it.
Like so, everybody around my dad's an accountant, my brother's an accountant. I can do my taxes and I can do my books, but I don't serve clients. So, but long story short, what I notice is that the linear way of how an accountant is, I don't say groomed, but like conditioned, let's say, by the
Train.
way that trained, right? Like
Yeah.
it's trained to consume a lot of content
Yes.
and memorize. And it's also trained to know a lot of penalties and consequences and fatal, like deadline. Like the word dead is inside of the vocabulary of accounting. So talk about like fatality, right? So like catastrophic thinking is conditioned in the
Yeah.
accounting world. So
Yeah.
when you say let's think creatively, because
Yeah.
even the word a creative accountant is someone that
I know.
typically does it in
Right.
Hialeah,
It's a
Miami,
negative
which is
thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
the most red flag thing that
Yeah.
anybody could think of.
Yeah.
So like everything, society has built all of these barriers to create creativity from the accounting industry, which is interesting. And me not being one just gives me
Mm,
the freedom to say, hey, you could do this. And then
yeah.
also knowing that my brother is one of the
Yeah.
most creative people I know who
Yeah.
happens to be an accountant, you know?
Well, and I see that theme so much with accountants, especially recently. And I don't think it means that accountants are, they're now creative and they didn't used to be. I think a lot of accountants are beginning to see that they have permission for that creativity to come out in ways that are not the debit, the credit, the penalty. Like you said, it's completely right for the accountant to say, this is wrong to do this with your taxes. Don't do it. You will be penalized. Do this instead. It is right. But that doesn't work with marketing. And like you said, back to your point on creativity, the best creativity has no defined outcome. And that is very hard for an accountant. It is very hard for any business owner who, including myself, who rules our day by, was I productive? Did I achieve?
Right.
Did I tick off things? And if, okay, that can also backfire because we're like, yes, I did. I ticked off 17 little tiny, reactionary things, but did I actually achieve some of the big picture stuff? And then when I block out a day to work on it, I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'll just create this quote and write to this client because that's comfortable and feels like I'm achieving. So you have to this is very hard, but you have to give yourself permission to have creative space and time that may achieve nothing. I guarantee
Yes.
you it will in the long run. Your exercises with your brother, there's always an outcome at some stage,
Yes.
but it's not like for like. And accountants are used to going, I had this creative session. We came up with 17 stupid ideas. We came up with one good one. We implemented it. We made $10,000. Therefore, our creative sessions are useful. And we have to turn that around and say the creative session is useful because we held it.
Nice. It's redefining everything. There's this thing that was born out of our workshop in New York. Hector and I, we do workshops from time to time. And he was just talking about like creative ways to position pricing, position elements inside the scope, and like how you could just freeform and figure out what conditions you want to create and how much you want to charge. And as long as the value you create is always greater than the fee you charge, he literally said anything could be anything. And that became our answer to any objection.
I love it.
Hey, anything could be anything. And like anytime we're arguing about anything, remember, anything could be anything. Yeah. And it's just such a cool, this common language you can create amongst people where just say, like, just free yourself from the shackles of like these programming that has told us what needs to be and what should be. Like those words are so, they drag you down. And I'm just an accountant. You've mentioned that before.
Right.
This is shrinking language, right? Yeah. We want to think expansive language and think expansively.
And it applies to your skills too, departing for a second from the, creativity and marketing thing and going back to the skills that accountants have and the work that they do. One of the biggest things I see is that accountants, and often the ones that we work with, are actually really humble people. Yes. So they're the kind of people who are like, well, that only took me 5 minutes, so I don't need to charge for it. And you're like, you just saved this client $60,000 because of a knowledge that you have from 20 years of experience that they don't have. They would never get to by reading every IRS tome ever. And so therefore your advice and the results that you give them is valuable. So one of the biggest things I would encourage accountants to do is think about the impact that you have on these clients and, price accordingly because they will pay it. If you get a result, they will be like, oh my gosh, if I had not had your help, I would be in this situation. And you're putting them in a new situation because of your experience, and that is worth something. And sometimes it's worth quite a lot. So that's another blocker when it comes to marketing because they're like, oh, I couldn't charge that. That's too much. People wouldn't pay it. But instead, if you turn it around and go, let's look at what I've delivered for clients. And I absolutely highly, highly recommend case studies as one of the most important marketing assets you create for your firm. If you create nothing else, create one really, really good case study. If you can get a bunch of Google reviews as well, good. But a big, solid case study that tells the whole story. They were here. They had this problem. They came to us. This is why they came to us. This is what we did. Huge. This was the process. These are the fails, the bumps along the way. Here's the outcome. Here's the transformation. Ideally, you want more than one of these, but even one, then you're going, this is what we're capable of doing for you. And you change it from, oh, we have to spend $2,000 a month on accounting to we could have the outcome that they had.
Yeah. And to your point on that, I'll plus one that a little bit with the yes and it, if you will, because Hector and I, we talk about that in our community, is if you have an ideal client you want to attract, make your case study around that.
100%.
Right. And then if you have
Always.
multiple, and because there's so many different ways that you could say, you could talk about a case study for a niche, or you could also do a case study on a very narrow problem, right?
Yes.
So like it was a job
Yes.
costing or an
Correct.
inventory related thing. It
Yep.
doesn't have to be a manufacturer
Yep.
for X industry,
Yeah.
but like yeah, and that's it's so much fun to be able to like, and then have a few of those examples. And then the last note that I will add to that great example you shared is my mentor, who's also an author of a book by the name Exactly What to Say, Phil Jones, says there's 3 questions in every customer's little voice in the back when they're reading that case study, or when they're seeing a video of you, or when they're reading Google reviews, is have you done this have you done this before? Have you done this for someone like me? And
Yep.
have you done it recently?
Yes.
And that was like, oh my God, yeah.
That is I love those 3. It's so simple because as comprehensive as I would recommend a case study to be, ultimately it is answering those questions. And again, the more variety of them that you have, I recommend 3 types of case studies. So one is the full case study. We're talking full website page on your site, or big blog post, or PDF guide. This is a story. Then the lowest level is the Google review. And I'm not talking, I worked with Carlos and his team. They are great. I love Carlos
Right.
and Hector.
I
Please
came in
work
for
with
this problem. Here's how he
them.
came in.
Yeah,
This was the
yeah,
transformation. This was
it has
the
to be.
outcome.
Has to be a transit. No, we did a case studies training, and the trainer said, no change, no story. So if you want to create anything, Google review, case study, etc., there's got to be a change. And then the one in the middle, so you got the big case study and you got the little Google reviews. The one in the middle is the micro case study, where you take the testimonial and you share your perspective on it. So they've said, I came to Carlos, I had this challenge, I didn't know what to do, they helped me with this, and now I'm in this place. And then you say, yeah, and when this person came to us, we thought, we went through this process, and we were thrilled to work with them because we love working with this kind of client. And I could not agree more that any of your marketing needs to be targeted to the kind of client you want to clone. So don't create a case study for a client who's frustrating, because I guarantee you'll get another frustrating client just like them, because they will see themselves in the story.
Incredible. That's so awesome. It's so generous of you too to share some of these like little tips. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I'll want to make sure that we're good on time here, and I'll close off with this this last question, and then we'll kind of wrap up. But there is this one part in the book that I was just like, oh my God, you're so like, this one hit me so hard, because I went through it, especially right now in the process of writing the book. So I'll give you a mini context, and I'll tell you, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, which is I was writing the book, I got a crazy creative block, and I wanted to quit. But I went through the finish line, which is this idea of like the self-sabotage
Yes.
when you're so close to finishing the thing that you've committed to. Like, what is that about? And like, what can you share that would be helpful for an audience, to the audience who wants to like go after something,
Yeah.
and then maybe they're inches away, but I think partially it's like afraid of success, maybe, or something else. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I was going to say, I think there's multiple aspects for different people. I think everybody's self-sabotage often comes from a different source, probably similar to your 5 reasons. Maybe yours comes from imposter syndrome. Maybe yours comes from fear of success. Maybe it comes from fear of failure. But whatever the reason is, the self-sabotage happens when you are literally in spitting distance, as they say, and you just slow down and you back up, and you don't even know why you're doing it. I mean, I honestly used to think it was just me. I was like, I think everybody else is just achieving, and I am just getting to 98 and stopping. And I'm like, why? Why am I doing this? And ultimately, it often does, as I said, lots of reasons, but it often does come back to, no, what am I going to do if this goes really well? So it is our optimistic entrepreneurial mindset that goes, I'm not just going to publish this book. It's going to become a worldwide bestseller. Everyone's going to want me on their podcasts and their events. I won't have time for my business. I won't have time for my family. I'm going to be going to, And our brain takes us to this positive place, but makes it a negative place. And then we go, well, I have to protect myself from all of that. And so we, even without noticing it, just begin pulling back on the reins a bit and going, well, I don't have to finish that straight away. Maybe I need to think about it more. Maybe I need to get this right. A perfect example of this is the book. This cover here is not the original cover that I approved. There was a different cover, and I loved that cover, but I had a nagging feeling that it wasn't the right cover for this audience. It was very creative of a cover, and I loved it, and I ran it past all these people, and they all loved it. And then I thought about it, and that wasn't the self-sabotage. Thinking about it was great. The self-sabotage was, oh no, I have to pick the perfect book cover, and if I pick the wrong one, no one will read this book. I didn't think it through to that level, but that is exactly what my brain was saying. I was like, if I pick this cover instead of this other cover, utter disaster. Carlos will never have me on a podcast. Nobody will. Jason won't write the forward. Disaster. And I finally had to this will be great news for accountants. I had to get down to the data and say,
Nice.
what is it that my audience needs? And my audience needs a cover that they can understand very quickly. And this very creative cover that I love and is super fun is hard to understand quickly. And my approach was, yeah, but that's intriguing and that makes people want to pick it up. So then I looked at all the feedback I got and I realized that all the people who liked the funky, clever cover were not accountants. They were designers. They were people who consider themselves creative. Almost all the accountants were like, I see where you're going there, but the second one is much easier. And I had to listen to my own advice, which is your marketing is not for you. Your brand is not for you. Your book is not for you. So if you are designing a book cover going, I love this cover, this is such a nice cover, that's not the best way to approach it. So I finally went with this other cover and went, I'm going to be kind of grumpy about this. And then as soon as I'd made the decision, I was like, this is very exciting. This is great. And this is the first time I've thought about it since, because we were able to move into that. But the self-sabotage for me was this disaster imagining, or super positive imagining, as we said, and that can prevent you from just finishing and seeing. I could have there's no right or wrong answer. Maybe the other cover would have been better. Who knows? But I had to just pick one and get a decision.
And it takes a lot to override your creative identity ego.
Yes.
Right? Because
yes.
it's like I have to do, either like I need to serve my audience, not myself in this scenario. Right? Like you needed to make a choice where you were like,
For
I
the
could do
audience.
this as a self-serving act, or I
Yes.
could do this as an act to create a pathway for an audience that maybe won't get my own interpretation of like what beauty and art and creativity is. At the end of the day, is it the message that you want to get across, or is it you telling them how creative you are?
Well, and that was it, is coming back to what was the core message of my book. And I'm like, the core message is you are creative, even if you don't realize it. And I want to invite you into that. I want you to feel welcome to that and intrigued by it, not like, oh no,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. And that
Not
first cover was
intimidated
like,
either. Not intimidated either, right? Because that's the other thing. Like if I see like a really creative cover, I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting, but
obviously you're
like
so creative.
can I identify with it, right? Like, and so that's really
Yeah.
strong. That's
Yeah.
very powerful to make
It
that
is.
decision. Yeah.
Back to your point on ego, that was another point within the Unreasonable Hospitality book, was to strip away the ego from what the customer saw on a particular thing. So the customer saying, oh, I ordered this steak medium rare, this is rare. And the server going, oh, no, that is medium rare, but if you want it cooked medium. And the owner going, oh, my word, we don't shame the client or the customer for thinking that. And I think there is a challenge with things like accounting and marketing, because sometimes we need to educate the client. It doesn't help to be like, oh, you're wrong, but we'll just fix your tax return. But there is a principle, and his point was the ego one, The point is not to prove that you are right as the accountant. The point is to educate and help the client so that they understand and are delighted. And if you're like, no, you're wrong, that's going to shut things down. But if you go, oh, that's such a good point. Let's, talk about this and give you the good
Ye-
experience.
Yeah, it made me think about like the point isn't to tell him the truth that you see, it's just to help them explore the truth that they see in an alternate way or in a mutually agreeable way. Does that make sense? I hear what you were saying. Let's look at an avenue where together we agree on a new truth together. So
Yes.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome, Karen. I want to be respectful of your time and super grateful for you joining and sharing so many incredible nuggets. Like honestly, it like in my heart has been just like, singing this entire
Yeah.
time. You speaking my language towards this journey of like embracing being creative and like everyone is creative. And if you were to leave this audience maybe with one helpful tip around like what it could be like a first non-scary step into activating the practice of creativity, what could that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially because, as with all things creativity and marketing, I think different people will navigate towards different things. So, some people might be more moved by a 100-day challenge, some people might be more moved by something smaller. But I think the simplest one, and the one that the most people have mentioned to me thus far, has been the incredibly simple one of moving location when you are working, even the slightest bit, literally turning your chair and being like, I'm going to move my table and I'm going to work this way so that the window is there instead of there. That's like the tiniest one. A bigger one could be I could move to another portion of my office. An even bigger one could be I'm going to work upstairs in the house. A bigger one could be going to a coffee shop or co-working with someone. And just the activity of switching your space and your perspective will
Mm,
change the way you work. Now, I will caveat that by saying it tends to work best if you are doing thinking work, creative work, marketing work, business development ideas, maybe less so where you're, plugging away at the G sheet. But anything that you can do to shift your space that you're in just for a time, just for an hour. It doesn't, I think a lot of times when we think about doing things creatively, we're like, okay, first off, I have to do it for a whole day, and then I have to do it every week. And you're like, just 30 minutes. One of my favorite things to do is to put a timer on my watch for 5 minutes where I don't look at a screen and I don't pull out my phone and I don't do anything. I just sit and just stare. It works great on a train. And it is hard if you don't practice it. You're like, wow, I've
yeah,
obviously been sitting here for 17 minutes, a minute and a half. Okay. So that would be mine would be what is
yeah,
the slight shift in perspective that you can give yourself? Can you work from another room? Can you work from a coffee shop? Can you sit in the yellow chair rather than the green chair?
I love
Literally
it.
that simple.
Change your environment. Yep. Your perspective and what you said, your perspective. I'll finish this little story about the right before the finish line self-sabotage
Mm,
experience that I had with the book. So I had a creative block around March or April, and I just couldn't think of anything else to write. And I started going down the spiral of like, who am I to even like consider myself an author? Like, do I even have original thoughts? Like, am I cheating by using AI to help me, think about frameworks and like I went through like an entire identity thing, and then I just realized that I ended up procrastinating in my room or in my apartment for
yep.
about 2 to 3 weeks. Like
Yep.
I had no work, I had no client work, which is
Yep.
also adding fuel to the self-sabotage
Yep.
because I'm like
Pressure.
I'm not busy, I'm
Right.
not producing, like who am I to
Productive.
even have credibility? It was
Yep.
just a slow month, whatever,
Yeah.
right? And all of that was just like adding, and I said, you know what, I need a trip. And I ended up booking a trip to Spain, to Barcelona, and I needed to do like an errand. I could have done it like in Mexico City or somewhere else. I needed to renew my Venezuelan passport basically, but there aren't any Venezuelan consulates in U.S. because of the whole diplomatic stuff. And I said, oh, I'm going to go to Barcelona. Barcelona, it's my favorite city in the world.
Yeah.
I have a family member there. I'm gonna go there for a week. I'll do the passport thing, and then maybe something will happen. So I started going on walks. I grabbed coffee. I ate my Spanish food and listened to music, and it just flooded.
Yeah.
flooded with so many things.
Yeah.
Like everything just came at me. Everything that stopped for 2 to 3 weeks, like every feeling that I had about myself, or and I just grabbed my Apple Notes and I just went off and just wrote as I thought, and I was like, I'll get to you later, right? Like I'm gonna enjoy this moment, inspiration, write it down. Enjoy this moment, inspiration, write it down. Came back and it just couldn't stop. I couldn't stop, and I finished it.
Yeah.
So just wanted to tell you,
Yeah.
100% validation that changing your environment works,
Yeah.
especially when you're like going to try to tackle a big creative task. And big creative task could be mean something different to
Yeah.
other people.
Yes.
That was mine in my personal
Yeah.
perspective. But
Yeah, and I think because we make the project in our minds grow so big, and by moving your perspective, whether it's by a chair or by a country, you are reminding yourself that the world is a lot bigger than you remembered.
yeah,
And that although you are a small part of it, you are an important small part of it. And it helps you to be like, that's not how we do architecture. That's interesting. So it
yeah,
spurs that on. So
yeah,
yeah, I have hundreds of stories like that myself, but I
yeah,
love a week in another country, a week in another state, a day in another location
yeah.
to shift that
Oh,
creativity.
no better way to close this off. So, Karen, how can folks get in touch with you? I know I'll add some stuff in the show notes of how they can get in touch with you, but what's the best way someone can connect with you?
Yeah, best and simplest is our website, wearepf.com. There's a nice handy banner up there for ordering the book. There's a free resources section on that site, like a members hub that has checklists and downloads and briefs and all kinds of practical stuff you can use. And there's also links to the books there. So that would be the first place I would tell any accountant to go. If you want to connect with me personally, LinkedIn is the simplest and easiest. Just search Karen Reyburn, and I always respond to genuine DMs on LinkedIn. If you just want to ask a
Keyword.
question, I love, yeah, I love
Yeah,
to help accountants, and
that's
I'll
awesome.
either have a resource I can share with you or go, gosh, that's a really good question. Here's how I'd approach thinking about it.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks for joining. And folks, if you want to get connected with Karen, we'll add more notes in the show notes. And wishing you the best, and hope we can meet in person very soon. And I'm sure we
Yes,
will. We will.
that would be great.
All
Thanks,
right.
Carlos.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.